Welcome to the Canny Conversations podcast, Conversations with a Cause with social entrepreneur Safaraz Ali.
Hello, and it's time to welcome our listeners again to another Canny Conversation with a Cause, our business-based podcast. With me, as usual, of course, is Safaraz Ali. Saf, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Always good to see you. You're looking
It's delighted to see
very
you.
bright and chirpy today.
And are we not delighted to see our guest today?
Absolutely delighted. John is a veteran, as they say.
I'm going to ask him to tell his life story in about 90 seconds.
Oh, 90 seconds. Is that all?
But the man we've got with us today, if he doesn't know it about business, particularly in the West Midlands, nobody else does. Jon Griffin works on business magazines now, perhaps best known as the man on the business beat on the Birmingham Mail for very many years. It's a great privilege, John, to have you here. Just give us a bit of a run through of your background and how you got to where you are now.
Well, I did 40 years, more than 40 years actually, in newspapers. I count myself very fortunate, really, that I had such a long run in a job which I loved, actually, and I suppose you could say that I had the best years in newspapers. Maybe we can touch on that subject later on, but I started in the summer of 1975 on the Peterborough Evening Telegraph, covering village fetes and parish councils and that sort of thing. Realised that the job was, I was suited to the job was suited to me. And I did 3 years at Peterborough. I loved it, actually. It was wonderful times. And then moved up to Birmingham, where I got a job on the Birmingham Evening Mail first time round. Worked in Tamworth, where I still live. Did some subbing at Coventry, then moved over to the Wolverhampton Express and Star, where I did a 16-year stint, initially in Lichfield. Then we opened the office in Tamworth. Then they moved me to Cannock to cover the miners' strike, which was a great privilege, really. Great memories of that. Short spell in Dudley, onto the news desk in Wolverhampton. Did 3 years there. Missed reporting. Was better really at reporting than sitting behind a desk. So went back into reporting and did a lot of crime stuff, actually. Loved it on the Star. But times moved on. There was a change of editor, and I came back to the Mail and worked in Walsall for about just under 2 years. And then the great Ian Dowell offered me the business editor's job. And I landed on my feet at the right time, really, because it was just when the Rover story, the Rover crisis was coming to a sort of milestone, if you like, really. And was business editor for 17, 18 years. And then I took voluntary redundancy in the summer of 2015, and I've been freelancing ever since. So it's been a blast, really.
Wow.
Well, we got him, Safi, doesn't he? He's done much with his life, does he?
He's done a stint, hasn't he? It's a marathon, that is.
Well, he's a tremendous catch.
There's not many like John, so we're really privileged to have you, John.
Right, we're going to talk about the changes in the business environment in the West Midlands over that period of time, but we're also going to talk about the ways in which business and other aspects of news are covered as well in the media world as it's changed now. Saf, you're a businessman. How much business news do you consume? Where do you get it from? And do you trust it?
Okay, there's a number of questions there. So if I go back to, when I was a lot younger, my father was a news junkie. So he used to watch one news channel after another news channel. He used to have 2 newspapers delivered to the house. Birmingham Evening Mail, obviously. We started having the Post as well. and he also had an Urdu language newspaper as well, occasionally. And this is on top of the news. So the 6 o'clock news, then it's like a 7 o'clock news, and the 9 o'clock news, and the 10 o'clock news. And, I used to dread it really at the time, because I thought, you know what, how much news can you have? How much news can you consume? I'd rather watch one of the soaps or some of the channels, and the choice was fairly limited. We didn't have mobile devices. And so therefore, if the main TV in your home is on news, that's the only choice that you have. And I had to also have a conversation with my father on the news. And so news was something that I used to dread at times, because we had too much of it, and there used to be debates and so forth. And then there comes a moment where you actually start seeing things differently, and you go into your father's shoes to a certain level where you become your father in a way. Where I'm, I regularly consume the terrestrial, I don't know how to pronounce it, but the main TV terrestrial. I don't know. Terrestrial. Yeah, there you go, John. Thank you for helping me out. But Channel 4 News is what I watch, and I'm able to watch it on Channel 4 Catch Up, Channel 4 On Demand. I also watch Newsnight wherever I can, Panorama, and on top of that, I've got my apps, which are sort of alerts. So you've got your breaking news, but you've also got the slow news. So I have a publication that's delivered to my house as well, called the Week, which analyzes the news, and I have Money Week and the Week. These are the sort of publications that I do. I did subscribe for a short while to the Telegraph, and you got to pay for their paywall. I did that for a little while, but now currently I tend to sort of look at specialist publications, and the Week and the Money Week is where I tend to sort of get my news from.
It's interesting, John, because we are of an age, and when you're on the Birmingham Mail, the concept of rolling news in some respect is not new, is it? Can you remember how many editions there used to be of the Mail during the day?
Well, when I joined the Mail in 1978, I think it was something like 10, 11 different editions. So they'd have what they called a lunch edition, which was a Birmingham one, which was, I think the deadline for that was about 9 o'clock in the morning. And they had a string of editions throughout the day. But not only that, they had a string of different district offices. And I think we had something like 14 or 15 district offices. And you're talking about Staffordshire, Warwickshire, Worcestershire, Solihull, Sutton Coldfield. They also had an office in Fleet Street in London. So the total, I think the total reporting staff was something like 50, dotted throughout the West Midlands, covering individual towns. And that coverage was blanket, really. So they cover everything that was happening in those towns. It's all gone. It's been swept aside, sadly.
I mean, unlike us, John, Saf is a stripling, a young man, and can very much with the digital age. I remember when you finished your career on the Birmingham Mail, you wrote a series of columns which I thought they were brilliant, and you described yourself as an analogue mind in a digital world. What did you mean by that?
Well, I'm the first to sort of admit that I never really adapted particularly to the digital world. I mean, I have done to a certain extent. Obviously, you have to. You can't be a dinosaur. But what my career was spent by and large in print, and so I'm a creature of my times, if you like, really. And I love those. I'm still a print man, rather than a digital man. I still read newspapers avidly. I read magazines avidly. I like the physical sensation, if you like, almost, if that's the right word, of actually holding a print, a newspaper or a magazine, and being able to, sit in your local pub, have a couple of pints, and just go through the newspaper at your leisure, really. I find screens are completely different to that, really. And I think, to be honest, the world spends too much time staring at screens, I'm afraid. And it's changed the nature of news as well. If you think that there's a certain discipline involved in writing a story for print, you've got to write it to a certain length. That doesn't apply with the web, if you like. You can ramble on for as long as you want to, but you've got that discipline in print, and I think that is something that is lost in terms of screen. People probably think I'm a dinosaur. Probably am a dinosaur, actually. But I'm proud to be a dinosaur.
Well, if you're a dinosaur, you're a Tyrannosaurus Rex of the media world. I asked Saf a question, John. I said, should he trust what he consumes now, given that there are so many fewer journalists than there were at one time? Can we trust it in the way that we could in the days when you were telling us what was happening all over the business world in this region?
Well, I suppose it depends what you're reading, really. I think that there's far less coverage. Certainly, if you look at this region, they will argue the Post and Mail, my old employers, where I spent so many happy years, now called Reach, will argue that they are in fact reaching more people than ever before, and that is probably true because so many people have access to free information out there on the net. It's the caliber and the quality of that information which I would question, and we've already discussed the fact that there's not as many journalists employed. A whole swathe of all those officers have gone. So the towns are not being covered in the same detail as they were before. But they do as well as they possibly can in many ways. But I think that print-wise, they're fighting a losing battle because you've only got to look at the circulation figures. The Mail is selling less than 10,000 now. The Post is selling something like 1,100. The Mercury's selling, 5,000 or 6,000. So what is the future for those titles? I don't know. But I fear the worst.
It's broader than that, John, because, journalists are the people that keep those that make the decisions and rule us to account. And I think there's a real sort of democratic challenge with what's happening. Saf, it's not very often in your life that you're going to have the opportunity to talk to a Tyrannosaurus Rex. So what would you ask the dinosaur alongside you about? And what would you perhaps challenge in terms of what he's just said?
No, there's many things I actually agree with. John's got an opinion. He's had lived experience. He's gone through that. He's just sharing those experiences. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. In terms of the discipline of writing for newspapers, of course, it's different to writing a blog because there is no such thing in terms of limits. There's no such thing in terms of what you do. That's clear. In terms of this whole element of what's the source of information and so forth. It's really how do you verify your sort of viewpoint on a story. That's the thing, isn't it? For example, if we come from an era where a newspaper is leaning towards the left, it's leaning towards the right, it's a little bit more center. What the opinions of the owners of the publications are. We sort of know that to a certain level, but now it's getting a little bit harder in terms of what the stand is of that particular news outlet or the publication. You just don't know that. As I said before, you knew a particular publication is a little bit leaning on this side, or this is what their mechanisms. How do we get that? How do we get our source of information in terms of that gives us, in some cases, unbiased. Some people want to go to publications where they agree with, because they want to, that's their viewpoint. They have a certain confirmation bias, so they tend to they tend to go towards that. But it's really where do you get your news where you can say this is something a little bit more unbiased. It's not necessarily an opinion. It is more fact based, and it probably gives you a middle ground. I think that's where that's the thing that I continuously look for. And I just thought, if John can help us a little bit in terms of, it's probably likely to be online, but where is that sort of source that we can all look for to say these guys will give us a little bit more of a all-rounded central approach. So in a way, that's a question there, John. Where do we get what's the source of information that you tend to look for to get an understanding of a situation or a
I think that the sources have remained more or less the same. I mean, if you look at the Nationals, they still have. If you read the Guardian, you have a different viewpoint from if you read the Telegraph. And you got specialist niche publications. You got the Economist, or you got the Private Eye, or you got the Spectator. They've all got their own agendas, if you like. Really, regionally, newspapers. They're apolitical, really, in the regions, and that's a good thing. The point I was trying to make was that the depth of coverage, certainly in this area, in the regions, and elsewhere in across the UK. There isn't that depth of coverage anymore because you haven't got the amount of journalists covering it. In actual fact, I have to be fair to my old employers, and they were taking on staff last year. But they have the numbers of staff there haven't replaced what they've lost in previous years. So you haven't got the blanket coverage of the towns in the West Midlands that you used to have, and that was trusted coverage. That they were professional journalists. So that sadly, I don't think that's going to come back. And we all know that the internet is like the Wild West, really. You can believe what you want to believe, if you like. And there's so many different sources. I mean, one of the big problems is everybody thinks they can be a journalist. So people will set up their own websites or blog and stuff like that. But they're not journalists. I mean, I couldn't pretend to be a carpenter or a funeral director. I wouldn't obviously, or any others. I've been a journalist all my working life, and I trained to be. And I continue to be a journalist. But the internet has set up, it's a can of worms, really. And you've got to be very careful what you read. We all know that there's disinformation out there. And sadly, that disinformation can disrupt lives.
I mean, just to remind our listeners, we're listening to a canny conversation with, of course, Jon Griffin joining Safaraz Ali for a chat about business and the media. If you're enjoying what you're listening to, do like us, do subscribe, and do share. And if you're not been enjoying it, you're probably not still with us. So that's where we go. Saf, do you, in terms of what John has said, my view, for what it's worth, which is not a great deal, is that there's a place for comment and for news within any publication, be it online or be it print. But it's important that it clearly distinguishes between the two. But moving on, because John's had such a illustrious career covering business in this patch, Saf, what's the biggest business story in this region that you think of in terms of yourself as a consumer of news? And John, there must have been so many, but is there a standout business story? Saf, you go first.
Okay, I mean, there's period. Like, for example, the West Midlands mayoral elections. For me, that was a big thing. Devolution took place, a change within the region. We were electing a mayor, first time ever. What the impact of that change is going to be is going to affect all of us. What the powers of that, that individual we're going to have, how, and really the whole economic perspective from my view was was going to change. And so for a period of time, for those elections, prior to those elections, in terms of the whole campaign, I was following it on a regular basis, and multiple sources, not just in terms of the traditional papers, but also obviously the local, regional, because it wasn't really a national story; it was a local story. But then you've also got your social media, your Twitter. You've got your individual people who are posting, and for me, that was a massive story recently. A bit more than the local elections. I think local elections is always an area where people are interested in, but for me, that was a very big story. Not so long ago. That's probably something which is a bit more memorable for me. HS2, again, that whole story in terms of HS2, Birmingham International Airport. I'm always interested in terms of the infrastructure, what's going on regionally. For me, those are big stories. I think any large employer coming into the area, any large employer making changes, job losses. I think we've had Leyland DAF one time, the Land Rover, JLR, those sort of stories. They're big stories, and I'm always a sort of they're general interest to everybody because that affects the economy as a whole.
John, you've done so much over the years. Miners' strike you mentioned earlier on, the big changes with the automotive sector. Is there a standout story that you remember that?
Oh yeah, I mean the Longbridge has got to be the biggest one that I covered as a business journalist. It went on for. Well, I took over as business editor in the end of just before Christmas 1997, and that was when BMW owned Longbridge, Rover and Land Rover, and it was just coming to the crux really at that point. So I landed on my feet. BMW denied that they were going to sell off Rover, and then suddenly in early 2000, March 2000, story broke in Germany actually that they were selling it to John Moulton, of Alchemy Partners, who was the venture capitalist, and they said they would cut, I think it was 5,000 jobs. Immediately, which is in fact how it turned out later on. But there was a big story there to cover in the intervening years, and then the Mail got behind it. It was a classic example of a great newspaper campaign, which was masterminded really by Ian Dowell, the editor, along with Carl Chin was a big help, and the unions. And there was a march to save Rover where we got 50,000 people there. And that swung the bid for control of Rover towards the Phoenix 4. It was John Towers and co. So the story sort of unfolded over a period of the next 5 years. They continued to produce cars at Longbridge, but they never really had a chance. I mean, they never made money. They were losing money, hand over fist. And in the end, of course, as we all know, Longbridge closed in 2005. But they did support relatively well-paid jobs for those 5 years. In the end, they ran out of time and money. And then, of course, the Chinese came in. They went into administration. The Shanghai Corporation bought them, and eventually it went full circle almost, and they became MG UK under the Chinese, which is what John Moulton said he was going to do sort of 5 years previously. But it was a fantastic story to cover, and I have some very, very vivid memories all the way through, really.
And maybe, John, I don't know, a turning point when this region stopped being a serious industrial powerhouse and became a McBurger economy. Saf, your thoughts? I mean, if you, I don't know if it's not your part of the city, but Longbridge, where John said, there used to be, I think it was 10,000 people making motor cars. It's now very nice. There are fancy apartments, there are a lot of shops. But, they're low-paid, relatively low-skilled, insecure jobs. That's the way we've gone. And do you find that sad, sir?
I think it is sad, but it is also generally where things are going. So, in terms of the particular Rover story, I mean, I do remember that, and it was, again, good versus evil. So you had, to a certain level, John Moulton, he's a venture capitalist, private equity. They're bad, and then these guys, they're trying to be good, and these are sort of things I sort of tend to remember. And every story has to sort of have a bad person and a good person. And in this particular case, I think in the end, yes, 5 years, we've had 5 years, but I think the wrong people were given the opportunity in that particular case. But going on, we're just living in a different world. It is completely different in terms of how things are made, and this is unfortunately the sign of times. But it is reversing to a certain level because we are producing higher value goods. We've got higher high value manufacturing taking place, and you've got some stories out there that are leading the way in terms of our place within the world of manufacturing. And manufacturing has a place. It definitely has a place, and we've sort of learned that to a certain level with the whole COVID period. The fact that we need to rely on ourselves and a little bit more, be able to sustain ourselves, and I think our mindset has changed, and being able to produce goods within the UK, mainland UK, I think is definitely necessary, should be encouraged. There was a time where governments were supporting businesses to create these jobs. Now it just seems to be, as I said, based on consumerism as opposed to servicing the people that are there. Many sort of plants are being closed, and they're either becoming shopping centres or houses, and it is a sad thing to see. But I think that's just the economy as it is, and we're not going to be able to change that. And we can reminisce as much as we can, but it is unfortunately. Unfortunately,
I mean, obviously, this is the workshop, or was the workshop of the world, yes. And you're not going to go back to the days where British Leyland employed like 30,000 people up at Longbridge. We've lost tens of thousands of manufacturing jobs, some of them in the last 20 years, and that trend will continue. But you will have, I mean, Jaguar Land Rover, if you look at what's happened there, that's almost the reverse side of the coin from what happened up at Longbridge, in that they were on the brink early in 2009, and they were going to close Castle Bromwich and just retain Solihull and Halewood, and then they changed their mind and they invested millions of pounds, tens of millions of pounds, and created thousands of jobs. I think they've had a few blips down the road since, but can you imagine what the West Midlands would have been like if we'd have lost Jaguar Land Rover? So, there is still niche operations in manufacturing will still survive, and but maybe not. Probably not in terms of mass employment that we've had in the past with the likes of Longbridge and some other of the bigger employers. I mean, Cadbury's don't employ anything like they used to. We lost LDV. We lost Alstom, the train makers. Many jobs have gone, so, all in manufacturing. But equally, we got the electric car revolution coming around the corner. So we'll have to see what happens with that one and how that affects the West Midlands.
Yeah, I mean, both of you, what do you think about the role of the media in terms of keeping those that make the decisions that rule our lives honest? I mean, when we look at the current situation, we're in the early spring of 2022. We've got a Prime Minister who's a proven liar and charlatan, somebody for whom traditional conservative values like loyalty and honesty and integrity and family values are an anathema. And yet he seems to get away with it. If we had a more powerful and questioning media, do you think that we would be holding people to account perhaps more effectively than we are? And do you think in the past, we were better at that? Because, the political leaders in the past didn't get away with what's happening now. Both of you, what do you think?
Well, I think that Boris has had a bit of a pasting, really, at times. From maybe you're right in what you say, but he's certainly. I think there is a very questioning media, and if you look at the Nationals, they'll weigh into Boris. The Daily Mirror will weigh into him. The Guardian will weigh into him. So it isn't the case that I think the age of deference, if you like, was swept aside long ago in the 60s by when Private Eye was suddenly appeared and stuff like that, and the satire boom. So I think that Boris will always get it in the neck. Any prime minister would, actually. I mean, you look what happened to Theresa May. Look what happened to John Major. Look what happened to New Labour, if you like, really. So that is an important and essential role of a questioning media, and long may that carry on.
Do you think the media holds this leaders to account, perhaps as it should, Seth?
I think consumers do as well. I mean, we've got consumers who are able to get their voice out a lot more. Twitter. Definitely social media, but also in a way where they can actually raise petitions, which we never had that before, and people are more expressive of their opinions, and I think that's also changed. I think from a media perspective, I think they've done well in terms of actually picking these stories up, but it's just. I think that people are a little bit disappointed that nothing seems to be happening, but it is there. People are raising their concerns, and it's quite obvious in terms of where the tone is in terms of what people's view is. But I think the Conservative Party will probably pick that up and probably have some sort of change, not too distant future, but we'll see.
Let's just go back to the newspaper business, both of you, one as a consumer and one as a provider. Traditional journalism, death by 1,000 cuts, the majority of them self-inflicted. Do you agree, John? I mean, what we've been talking about is the way in which newspapers have cut back on journalism. If any product cuts the service it provides to its customers, perhaps it can't be surprised that fewer people consume it. So to what extent has what's happened been inevitable, and to what extent, as I say, is it self-inflicted? And Safaraz, from your point of view, after John, if you would, as a consumer, do you feel that you are as informed and accurately informed as perhaps you were 20 years ago?
Well, I think it's a bit of both, really. I think some of it, yes, definitely is self-inflicted. There's been this rush to digital. I'm not entirely sure that they thought it through to the extent that they should have done. I mean, they realised that circulation was falling, and they can't hide away from that fact. 40 years ago, the Mail was selling 340,000 copies a night. Now it's selling less than 10,000. So they've got to do something. Yeah, I mean, and they've put all their eggs in the digital basket. And I think that's at the expense of, the old business model worked. I can understand why it's not working anymore, because the internet has disrupted everything and changed the whole media landscape. But to throw everything into the digital basket, and even today, when Reach had their last accounts, I seem to recall that the figure for print advertising revenue is still 75%. In other words, digital's something like 25%. That's Reach. I'm not sure about the other companies, but that figure was quoted very recently. So what happens when those print titles go? they're going to lose a large chunk of their advertising revenue, and I'm not sure how they're going to get it back by recouping it through digital. And there's the editorial side of things, the giving away stories, giving away great exclusives free online. I don't think was a very, very sensible idea. I mean, I think they should have held back, and there should have been a more restrained approach. Maybe they should have looked at the number of redundancies they're making on a regular basis and thought to themselves, well, is it a good idea to get rid of quality journalists? Are we affecting the product? In many ways, it's too late. It's gone too far, and they're reaping what they're sowing if you look at the circulation figures.
Saf, as a consumer, obviously you are a relatively young man, but you're old enough to have been around, perhaps not in the golden era of newspapers, but in an era when, people like John were working on newspapers that sold tens of thousands of copies a day. Do you feel that your access to information has been degraded, or perhaps not?
I think a lot of it is going back to consumer choice and where consumers are moving towards. It's very similar, the points that John's raised, very similar in terms of the music industry, in terms of the vinyl, the records, and how consumers engage. We've had a YouTube generation where a lot of the music is from there. We've got Spotify, we've got all of these other things where people less and less now are paying for their music. They're able to access it, and we've had very similar in terms of news where you're able to get it for free online, and people weren't paying for the hard copies, and that's happened there. And it's a technological revolution, and it's also a consumer sort of way consumers are going now. Consumers have a lot of choice. It's like, how many channels do we have in terms of satellite TV, the cable networks, all of the choices that we have, not just in terms of Netflix and Amazon Prime and all these, there's so much choice that you just can't keep up with it. And this is very similar. You've got radio stations online, you've got so many choice there. And very similar now, there's a lot of choices about really filtering that. So we're in a position where there's just too much information, and really, how do you actually go and select that? So the key now is really picking the thing that the right thing for you, really. And there's an art to filtering. There's an art to finding this information, and also understanding very clearly, which is sponsored, what are adverts, what are opinions, and what is the sort of journalists that we've been talking about, and that is a little bit murky, and it's not as easy as it may seem.
Social media is a source of a lot of information these days, and you're very active on social media, Saf. Is it something that we should cheer and cherish, or is it something that we should curse? And in terms of the content of social media, would either of you or both of you agree that the only way that you can bring this to book, and it would be difficult, but is to hold the platform responsible for its content in the same way that a newspaper that John and I used to work on would be held responsible for its content? In other words, there are libel laws, there are rules about right of reply, there's a requirement for professional journalism to be balanced in some respect. So how do we control this monster, John?
I think you've got to break them up like they did with the oil companies. They wield far too much power. I mean, Zuckerberg has far more power than Murdoch has ever had, despite Murdoch's amazing career, and that can't be right. And it's a complete Wild West out there. You can't trust so much of what of the likes of Facebook and Twitter and all the rest of it. As I say, I'm a dinosaur. I'm proud to be a dinosaur, but I don't want anything to do with that world particularly, and that's got me into trouble in the past, really, to a certain degree. But I don't think, let alone my personal circumstances, I don't think it's the real world, and I don't think it's a society which can be seen as they shouldn't have that stake in society. The Silicon Valley guys over in San Francisco, they've changed the world, and to there's a lot of benefits from it. But I think that the benefits, the disadvantages outweigh the benefits, and I think we've seen the result of that with terrorists able to broadcast their message, teenage suicides, let alone the destruction of my industry.
Yeah, and such a brilliant route for organised crime as well. Safaraz, you correct me if I'm wrong. You're a social media fan. Why is Jon wrong?
I think I use social media mainly to be transparent. So leaving broadcasting aside and the whole journalist aspect of it, it's a platform for me to get my message across. It's a platform for me to talk to my customers, to our potential staff. It's also a way for me to tell the world, my thoughts, my views, and be a little bit more transparent in my journey in terms of, building the business, growing the business. And that's predominantly, why I say I'm a social CEO, because I'm a bit more out there in terms of public in that public life. So if I have a view on something, I'll share it. If I've met somebody, like for example today, I might put a photo up, and I'll share with people my sort of life, what I want to share, and that's my choice in terms of how much I want to share. And I'll share my sort of views and opinions on business matters and on things that I'm interested in. So that's really how I use that as a platform. Social media as a whole, yes, there's been many occasions where people have used the advertising features within social media to target people. So you've got a situation where, because behind the scenes of the social media platform, they understand you better because of where you navigate, how much time you spend on certain aspects of it. They have more information about you, and because they have information about you, you are now the thing that's of value, and that's what's sold to individuals. Where you never had that with the traditional media, and because now you're the instrument that's valuable, you are the thing that the social media platforms are selling. That's also targeting you better. That's what the sell is, but there's nothing overly wrong with that. But where I have a problem is that where the advertisements often are misdirected. So there's often advertisements there that Facebook and other media channels are broadcasting, which are clearly wrong. Whether it's PPI, crypto, and various other things, and these organisations are able to use that platform for a couple of weeks without any issues, and then until it's reported. Should Facebook be responsible for the content that somebody else puts out? Possibly not, because the content creator is that individual. But in some cases where there are advertisements, absolutely they should be responsible for those adverts. And I think that's where I draw the line in that aspect.
I mean, in the old days of newspapers, we'd be into that column that used to be on the right-hand side that Jon will remember that said late news, and it looked. but there's just two more things I'd like to deal with. If somebody wrote something about your company, Safaraz, and it was fairly critical, and they put it on social media, it's there. If you were writing a story, John, and somebody called you and said, Safaraz Ali is X, Y, Z, and I would imagine, you tell me if I'm wrong, that one of the things that you would insist on doing before you went to print was to ring Safaraz Ali up and give him the right to reply. Now, maybe the right to reply can be overstated. Somebody once said of the dear old BBC, who I admire hugely, that if they got an exclusive interview with God, they'd never be able to run it because they'd have to make sure they got an equal right to reply from the devil. But isn't that one of the cores of good journalism, John, the right to reply, or at least to ask somebody to comment if they're subject to?
Oh, yeah, undoubtedly. And we go back to what we were just talking about the I was talking about, the Wild West. People can go on social media and say whatever they like. To a certain, there have been cases where people have actually gone over the top and been taken to court and had to pay out, but they're few and far between. But your sort of anonymous keyboard warriors, they're all over the world, aren't they? Whereas the right to reply has always been a sort of a staple, one of the great staples of the press, and long may that continue. As long as newspapers survive, and I don't know how long, much longer. Certainly, some titles will survive. I think some of the nationals will keep going for hopefully for a long time to come. Not sure about the regions, sadly, but as long as they survive, they will always abide by that structure, and that is only right.
Saf, if somebody puts something online on Facebook or on one of the other social media sites that was adverse to you or your business, don't you think that it should be a requirement of the platform, not just the individual that's writing the nasty comment, but the platform should be required to ensure that you had a right to put your point of view?
I think in some cases you can, depending on what it is, you can report it, and there's a process that goes through that. But it's you're not talking to an individual, and you don't have you're not able to get a response. And it's one of these where it sometimes gets very difficult in terms of who's accountable and what that process is. But there is an element where you can report things which are probably problematic, and you can write and so forth. Ultimately, I think it is about whose content is it, who's responsible. And I just put it down. If it's an advertisement, I think definitely it's the platform that's responsible. If it's content, that's the individual. But again, there needs to be some accountability, particularly with regard to going back and getting that either corrected or taken off.
We are coming to a close now, but I know of one publication, well, there are probably others as well, that uses paid-for editorial without labelling it as such, which isn't part of my world or John's world. John, finally, hopefully you'll be with us sharing your insight, knowledge and experience for many, many more years. But as you look back on a career in journalism, was it a good life? What would you do differently? Obviously I'm not talking about the money, because I think most people know that if you want to get rich, you don't go into journalism. But would you do it again, and what would you change?
If I could turn the clock back, I'd do exactly what I've had a fantastic working life. It's not like being an accountant or a lawyer or anything like that. You don't, not at regional level anyway. But that, it never really mattered to me. It has been described as the best job in town, or the first draft of history and that sort of thing. And I always looked forward to going to work when I was working in newspapers, because you just didn't know what the day would bring, and it brought me into contact with people I would never met otherwise. otherwise. I went to places I wouldn't have gone otherwise. And more than anything, I suppose, I just loved it. I just enjoyed it and made lifelong friends. But if I was starting today, I think that life would be rather different. And I don't think. Well, I know that I wouldn't have anything like the experiences and the memories to fall back on, because the job's changed so much. I didn't change with it, but that was my decision.
Saf, before we finish it, any final questions for Jon? Any comments about the value that people like he plays in keeping us informed and perhaps even, dare I say, in keeping the democracy on course? Any comments?
Absolutely. I think Jon has seen things from a different perspective, particularly some of the changes that have happened within the West Midlands region, and those changes were there at a moment where there was a lot going on, and it's difficult times, and you've seen. The changing landscape, not only in terms of the region, but also in terms of people and how people have changed during that course. And Jon and I have had I've had the opportunity to sit with Jon on a number of occasions previously, and it's always fascinating to get some insights from Jon in terms of those experiences. Just want to thank you, Jon, for your time today.
Thank you.
And who knows? Perhaps we'll talk to Jon again in the future. So much knowledge and insight. Time's beaten us, it always does. So we'll curtail this canny conversation with a cause. We'll ask our listeners if they like us to demonstrate that, to subscribe if they feel that they would like to, and to share it, share the link with others. We also value feedback enormously. So if there are any questions or any comments about what we do and how we do it, they would be hugely gratefully received. So that's it for now. Take care of yourself. Until the next time. Bye-bye.